me to have the okay up here.
Looks like we're good. Golden. All right, folks. Welcome back to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Tonight, we have a special show for you. We have Ice Age Farmer on with us. Ice Age Farmer was here a little over a month ago, and we wanted to bring him back on and talk about crop loss. Christian, how you doing tonight, bud?
Doing well, Jake. Thanks for having me back.
We're glad you're here. This guy, we will promote his channel as well. Put his channel in our description box. Make sure you guys subscribe. Christian and I were discussing right before we started going live about right now I feel like that we are in a race, and we're in a race to get the information out, to get people informed and educated about what's happening, what's going on, and how to prepare and do it the right way. But before we get into tonight's topic, I wanted to start real quick with the hurricane situation down in the Gulf. By now, everybody knows that Tropical Storm Harvey at one time had dissipated. It turned into just a tropical depression. It regenerated over the Gulf. The waters there are very warm right now. Folks, they're talking about 12 feet of storm surge, okay? On top of the fact that we might see as much as 48 inches of rain in some areas. And the reason why we're going to see this kind of rain, and obviously you can see this on the radar, this is no joke. This is a monster storm. Even the eastern side of this, which I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but the eastern sides of these hurricanes are the most dangerous. And I'm just looking at the radar right now, and it does not appear, it looks like it's letting up a little bit, but that could be just from the cooling of the night without the sun in the sky. Not a meteorologist, just making observations. But folks, this is going to affect a lot of things, more than just people here in Texas. And I'm praying right now that everyone took warning yesterday. Actually, there was people trying to say we need to evacuate now. And a few channels out there on YouTube are also warning folks that there will be an evacuation situation if this continues to develop the way it did. And guess what? The forecasters got it right and then some. And it's alarming because all the warnings that we've seen today, I've never seen this kind of verbiage here in the United States where it says life-threatening floods. That's just something that we don't generally hear in the United States. But anyway, back to what it could affect. Gas prices. I mean, you all know we have oil rigs out there in the Gulf. I'm sure those have been evacuated. This storm looks terrifying, and I'm glad I don't live anywhere near it, and I pray for the people down south that they get to safety. I mean, even Louisiana, you're not out of the woods. There's a lot of moisture in the Gulf. Florida's getting pounded. And honestly, that's not something that's unusual here as of late. I can't tell you how many times where I get Lee calling me, and every time he calls me, he tells me about the biggest lightning he's ever seen, and it gets worse each time. So, let's keep an eye on this, be vigilant, but, do expect things like gas prices to go up next week, and hopefully everybody was prepared enough down there where they get the National Guard there in a timely fashion, and we don't have a duplicate situation of Katrina. We all remember that and how horrifying the response time was. And look, folks, United States of America, you don't expect for our country to ever have to suffer like a third world country does. And Katrina was sadly a third world country for a while in Louisiana, New Orleans. Thankfully, it's rejuvenated now, but off topic. Anyway, so I want to kind of switch gears here a little bit because with storms like this and storm surge like this, with 48 inches of rain, 12 feet storm surge, of course there's going to be crop damage. And before we start talking about numbers, unfortunately, Christian, you have actually have received some damage to your own system. Would you care to elaborate a little bit about what happened and what this is going to take to get things going again?
I sure can. I just want to sort of qualify what you were just saying. I don't think it's off topic at all to take a look at what's going on with Hurricane Harvey right now. We were already seeing stories about the ridiculously long lines and gas stations that are running out of gas. So when you say hopefully people are prepared down there, clearly they are not. No. And as always, when these sorts of things happen, we get very quickly a picture of just how long, or just how quickly, I should say, it takes the stores and the supplies like that to run out. People aren't ready for these things, and it doesn't work to wait until the last second and run out and get your stuff. So use that as yet another barometer of the net preparedness of folks out there. And if you're not in a better situation than what we're seeing those people online, if you would be there, then I would highly recommend you start getting prepared now. More prepared than you are, at least. Just take those, as I always say, take daily steps towards being more prepared, more self-sufficient, more resilient against any of these sorts of things. And then, yeah, Jake, you're right. I had to make an emergency trip to Germany for a family situation. And upon getting back, definitely had noticed that, I mean, this is sort of the experience with most gardens. When you come back to them, they have grown out of control and you've lost some things and have to sort of sort yourself out. So yeah, it's always fun to come back to an operation like that. Unfortunately, it's become increasingly clear that there was also something, I guess you could call it vandalism, some deliberate attempt to put a hose in my aquaponics and let that overflow, and then some of my, I thought that I didn't know what to think at first, but as I've looked further into this, there were some wires that were cut and some missing equipment and stuff like that. So someone definitely needed to. I'm not sure what was going on. I don't really want to speculate about why they would die here or how they found me and that kind of stuff. But the lesson there is a clear one. The security of your food producing apparatus is definitely something that needs to be considered, right? So there was a failure on my part to be here and be with my plants and be taking care of them, and then an additional failure to ensure the physical security of my operation here. So yeah, some great things, some things to learn from those experiences. And then I guess more broadly, what you can say is, if you are trying to grow your family's food, which we all should be, as we watch we'll talk about the crop losses today, and I think they alone provide ample reason to start taking your food production into your own hands. We'll see prices rise drastically just from the things we'll take a look at today, not even taking into consideration the fact that, in fact, climate on this planet is driven by solar cycles, and we're entering a period of drastic cooling following a grand maximum, which is the way that this just shakes out. And you can watch any number of folks, like NOAA meteorologist David Dilley does one of the best and just most clear presentations of these cycles and how we are poised right at the precipice of dropping off on severe temperature drop off. And that's we've entered the minimum. Just solar activity has started to drop off several years ago, but the oceans. It's not like when you take the pot off the burner. It takes a while for that water to start cooling, right? And we're starting to see that water cool now, which means I think we're right at the precipice of the temperature dropping, on top of all the crazy out of season events that are already happening, that are driving some of these crop losses we'll get into.
And that's it. And some of the things that I was going to share with you tonight about crop loss, this winter and spring, and it went back to winter, it confused the plants. I mean, that's all you can say is that in my notes that I have tonight, the crop loss and what happened and how it happened, it's all the same story. It was the freakish winter that we suffered this year. But with your situation, and Christian, I had you on a while back. If you don't mind, share with us some of the things that you grew, because it's not all about food. You're teaching me and other people about basically how to not only be efficient with growing food, but also growing things that are going to be beneficial to add to your meal. That way the portions don't have to be as big.
That's right. Yeah. So there's clearly a caloric intake need for the human body. We just need to burn so many calories a day to stay alive. But then the more interesting and difficult part of the problem, arguably, to solve is nutrition. And when you're trying to crack that nut, two of the things that I think are the more interesting tools in this tool set are spirulina, which is an algae that you can grow actually just get an aquarium and sort of raise the temperature and the pH of this environment. You give it a very specific set of conditions and ingredients to work with, and it grows itself. It takes care of itself. And you can harvest this algae out and then eat it. It doesn't look terribly appetizing, but actually I don't mind the taste as much as one might think just looking at it. It takes some getting used to. I think there are some image parameters that we have coming from like Western civilization and expectations about what our food looks like and where it comes from, that eating algae or farming crickets for protein would force you to break these sorts of image parameters. And I think that's going to be a fun challenge. And then another one that I like to mention is, because it's just fantastic, it's even more nutritious than spirulina. And I won't get into the breakdowns on these things, but suffice to say, they're just, it's fair to call them superfoods. You hear lots of people throw that term around for spinach or whatever. These are definitely like off the charts, impossible to compare leafy greens to them. You can check out some graphs and breakdowns I have on my website at iceagefarmer.com. But another one I was going to mention is Moringa oleifera, which is a tropical tree that's just absolutely prodigious. It grows these shoots of fresh, tender leaves that are pretty little. They got a little kick to them. They're kind of spicy, but you can also pan fry them, and that sort of mellows out a bit. And they're just off the charts on nutrition and really fun.
The moringa I didn't know about until I found your channel. And I learned that the moringa, that is, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the source of protein?
So you can get protein off of moringa. Actually, most of the parts of it are edible. So if you let it grow to seed, you're able to eat those seeds, and they have a little bit of a different protein profile than the leaves and shoots themselves. But yeah.
I mean, and to me, that's the most important part of your diet when we're facing a possible food shortage, or just if you're out camping and for the weekend. Protein is vital for energy. I know it's actually, not only is it vital for energy, but it's also, if you're trying to get a little bit more lean, a high protein diet. And I can speak from experience. I used to weigh 307 pounds, and on top of cutting out soda, I started eating more protein, tuna fish, whatever. And I probably should have listened to the doc and taken the break. I might have done it a little unhealthy, but I ended up losing, I think, 40 to 50 pounds off just protein diet alone. So it's good for you in many ways. It tricks, if you're eating nothing but protein, I do believe it tricks your body into burning stored fat, because there is no intake fat to burn in the first place. So that's another thing about protein. It's probably one of my favorite things. Basically, it helped me lose a lot of weight. Like I said, I weighed almost 310 pounds. So
it's actually when you cut out the carbs that your body will enter ketosis and start burning fats. And I remember we talked a little bit about this last time, how when you're eating carbs, then your body it gets into like a carb burning mode. And it makes it harder to burn that fat, which does tie into the weight loss. But more importantly, it just makes you crave carbohydrates. And so you have to go through like a 2-3, for me at least, it takes 2-3 days after I do a binge on carbs, for better or worse, and to get over that craving and back to like a ketosis sort of state where you're able to really work off the proteins and then the diet, the fats, the healthy fats in your diet. So you're sort of dancing around the edges of what I would call like a primal diet, where you just cut out the carbs altogether and then focus on healthy fats, some protein, but it's not like an all protein. We're not going Atkins, eat sausage constantly. It's just an appropriate amount of protein, and then fill up on really healthy fats, grass-fed butter, these sort of things.
Is bacon good for you? Because I could do a bacon diet. I could eat all bacon. I don't know about sausage, but bacon I can take care of. All right, so got that out of the way. And again, Christian, terribly sorry to hear about your setup. But again, the silver lining out of this is that my new subscribers and your new subscribers, everybody will get to watch this from the very beginning. And if anything, maybe people can start up and grow along with you and, compare notes and whatnot. So, I mean, there is some good out of this. And thank God you're patient enough to go through the whole process and share it with everyone again. Okay, so today I spent some time, actually during the week as well, looking up some stats about crop losses. And a lot of things I found out. There was a paper that was put out in Canada by Air Worldwide. They basically released a crop hail model for Canada, and this was posted on June 26th. Basically, it helps farmers determine what kind of losses to expect. And I didn't know that hail was, that big of a deal in Canada. Unfortunately, I've just never really studied international weather. But, looking at some of the things that it affects: barley, canola, corn, flax, lentil. And by the way, I've had lentil soup before, and that is absolutely delicious. Oats, peas, potatoes, soybean, and wheat crops. So that alone right there, with the hail damage that they have had, to the point where the wheat. Okay, where I'm going with this. Snowfalls that we got late this spring, for instances. Snow is good insulation for wheat crops before they start growing their stems out of the ground. But when you get a snowstorm in late April, well, once everything's melted, those wheat crops were all flattened. In fact, I think Kansas lost 40% of their wheat crops just from that storm alone. 40%. One storm. Another instance, and I've reported on this too, the peach crops. I had an email from an individual in southwestern France, and he showed me pictures of his peach orchard. They're getting unusually high winds right now and lots of severe weather, and they don't normally see that kind of stuff. The winds that they're experiencing right now are not normal. But he showed me his peach orchard, and 90% of the peaches were on the ground. So with that being said, here in the South, again, the same system that brought that snowstorm late in April affected the South as well. 90% of the peach crops in South Carolina were destroyed. 90%. Another place where they lost 75% of their crops this year, either because the peaches were too puny and they were worthless, or they had been damaged from the late cold that they got. Basically, that orchard that I'm speaking of that lost 8 million, they normally produce 8 million pounds. This year the crop only yielded 2 million, so they lost 75%, and that adds up to be somewhere around $5 million for these people. So I guess my question, and really I think you could probably only speculate, or maybe you do have the answer, because I know, Christian, you keep track of things like this. What are we going to do when we start seeing, these are just certain regions of the country, what are we going to do when we start seeing these kind of crop losses more widespread? What are insurance companies? How are we going to be able to afford all this?
Well, that is the question, Jake. I mean, I think we are already seeing prices rise as a result of the late frosts in Europe, and folks over there are just biting their tongues and waiting for apples to come down in price right now, expecting that will happen after this next harvest. But everything is continuing to get worse, and so I don't see that happening. And indeed, I mean, I think it's worth, those are some really damning numbers, and there are plenty more, and it's also interesting and worthwhile, I think, to go into why these are happening. So you definitely mentioned the late frost, where there was sort of a mild winter and then a nice early spring, but then bam, in late April and even right into May, some places were freezing over, and then even experiencing like snowfall again, which is just completely kills off whatever growth has started. And we saw that, like, if you look at the crop reports we're right at the end of the season now. And so if you look at the crop reports that are actively today coming out of Indiana and Illinois, they acknowledge that because 60 to 70% was all replanted after that happened. And so now everything is very immature, and they're sort of just really hoping. I mean, this is literally, if you go listen to these crop reports, I was tweeting them out and including them on my podcast. They're just saying, as long as there aren't any early frosts, I think we'll be all right. And they're saying this as we look at the headlines and we see record colds across Russia and across the entire northern hemisphere. Snow coming down in Canada, unprecedented freezes and snow coming down in Romania yesterday and today. So I don't have nearly as much hope as these guys who are saying, as long as we just get a few more, we can eke out a few more weeks before the first frost, then we might be all right. Actually, what he said, that's not even what he said. What he said is, as long as that happens, then we'll still be clocking in at about 10% under last year, year over year, which was in turn, again, 10% under the year before that. This is from Indiana. So the downward trend now, the 10% loss is the best case. And you're right. These things are coming in. They don't look great anywhere. And we are seeing, in many cases, these pretty substantial losses, 75, 60%, up to 90%. The peach crop in the U.S. South is completely gone. I mean, these things aren't just, it's not like peaches are more expensive. I mean, yes, that's the most obvious side effect. But also we need to acknowledge that there are hundreds of thousands of people who come in and do seasonal work to harvest these things and cut them up and clean them and can them and ship them. And I mean, that's exactly right. And so there are economic effects beyond even the prices that need to be acknowledged here.
And you bring that up too. And I read also somewhere when they talk about the economic loss for losing these crops, and it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. When you hundreds of millions of dollars are lost in Georgia, and this report came out in May and June. So like you said, a lot of the success, if there is any, is replant, but I wouldn't be surprised to see these numbers get worse by the time we do have our first frost.
I mean, I think you're exactly right. I think we're in a state of suspended disbelief right now, and as soon as these early frosts start hitting those places, they're not going to be able to say. I mean, right now, like they said, as long as this doesn't happen, so as soon as it happens, we're going to see these losses posted, and probably the prices are going to shoot up on the futures market, and maybe we should be positioning ourselves to benefit from that if we are into investing and able to do that. But absolutely. And okay, so we covered the late frost and snow that covered many of those losses, but it's not just that, right? It's worth mentioning also that the insanely named Lucifer heat wave that was raging through Europe, I mean, that blew away upwards of 60% of the crops in Serbia, and you see some reports coming out of there are just, man, it pulls at your heart. This one guy was saying, I had to mortgage everything this year just to get plants in the ground, and now they're all gone. And so he's just, I mean, it's obvious a lot of these people they're over leveraged and they're just going to lose everything.
Do you think there's people out there that actually farm without the insurance?
I'm sure, yeah. If this guy has every dollar he has was already spent, and then he had to mortgage his home just to buy seeds to put in the ground. So I think even if he's got insurance, he's in a world of hurt. And then, speaking of insurance, I was just out in Germany, as I mentioned, and spent some time on a biodynamic farm, where a biodynamic farm is it's a Demeter certified sort of organic practices taken to the next level, where they take in some theosophy and spirituality and soil amendments and good animal and soil husbandry and all these practices, and then they encapsulate that and codify it and certify you. So I was down the street from this farm that's just, suffice to say, they're doing things the right way, right? It's not like they're trying to squeeze a little bit of growth out of all of these chemicals. Right. And they were experiencing complete losses of fields of wheat that now are just sitting there fallow, waiting for these insurance adjusters to come out and appraise it so they can get paid the insurance for the crop loss. But that means that they're, what the farmer was telling me was that they're really behind in coming to appraise it. So their field is just sitting there unused. And apparently there's many such cases because their insurance is so far behind in checking it out. So yeah, it's not the best situation. And those, if this goes on like this, then the insurance companies are not going to be there for much longer themselves.
Well, and that's where I'm and I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but I'm kind of going to that route because, I mean, this is just a small piece of it right now as far as economics. And, like here it says the case of peaches in Georgia rose, and now they are, they went from $20 to about $30 a case. My brother works in the food industry. He's a manager, and he's already telling me that they have seen a $15 per case of lettuce price increase. Mm-hmm. $15. So, and that's significant. I think the price I think he said it went up 200% for them, for that particular, and produce is going to continue to skyrocket. And this was just year one. This was only the beginning of what's to come as far as our crazy climate right now. The grand solar minimum has just begun, and what worries me is that we're seeing a small piece of what's possible here in the future, what lies ahead. If we just get a 15% increase of this next year, I think it'll start hurting everyone's wallet. So
it's no exaggeration. I mean, avocados are another one that have more than doubled.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you start going out to, I love guacamole, but it's harder and harder to find because the restaurants just aren't going to pay for these things that are usually still considered condiments. Now it's like you got to pay your $9 to get a serving of guac, which is hell to me. It's awful. But no, I mean, on a serious note, this is why we are seeing New Zealanders steal avocados and then set up black markets and sell them on social media. Is because the prices are rising out of accordance with what is an acceptable, tolerable, perceived amount of inflation, and you just don't want to go out and spend $5 on an avocado. So people are lifting them and then reselling them.
Who would have?
And that's just the beginning, man. We're going to see a lot more under the table food distribution. Food disappearing from the carts. It's gonna get crazy. And so it's not a Debbie Downer, Jake. This is happening now. It only feels like Debbie Downer because everyone walking around you is still in their normalcy bias, not talking about these things, acknowledging it. It is happening now, and it is in acknowledging it. It's not being pessimistic at all. It's being realistic, and I want to emphasize that the people who have insane amounts of resources, right, the cryptocracy, the ruling elites, whatever you want to call them, only publicly are they pretending like this isn't happening. Only publicly are they still saying, hey, you kids should be worried about global warming. Wow, meanwhile, today we saw Bill Gates actively plowing millions of dollars of new investment into a meatless protein production facility.
Yes.
This is on the heels of, and we've talked about this before as well, Jeff Bezos from Amazon and Eric Schmidt, formerly CEO of Google, plowing their money into investments in vertical farming. It is not Debbie Downer. It is not unrealistic or weird to say that traditional agriculture is failing. We're watching it fail now. And anyone that has the resources is positioning themselves to benefit from that failure and then charge us on the other end of it for, like you said, $16 a head lettuce. So it only makes sense. The only rational reaction we can have to this data that's coming in is to start growing our own food.
Christian, you're not being exaggerant or conspiracy theorist when you say the elites are pretending in public that nothing's going on, but in the background they are preparing. And I'm gonna tell you something right now. I can't speak too much. I'm not at liberty, but I know for a fact right now that a very important person is considering features and structures on their property that will protect them during the grand solar minimum and beyond. So, and this person here probably has something to do with a lot of the global warming funding. So it infuriates me when I hear things like this, because they're like, the elites to me seem a little greedy, and they're going to make sure they get themselves taken care of first, and then what's left over, well, we'll let them fight over it after that. So it kind of that comment is not just some kind of skeptical, paranoid statement. That is so true, and I know it to be true because I've heard it with my own ears, and I know it's happening right now as we speak. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because like I said, I know that's happening right now. So back to some of these numbers here. And I said $16 extra for a case. Not correcting you, but I just didn't want anyone to think that we're telling everyone that lettuce is going to be $16 a head. God forbid what we would be told of at that point. But it's a very realistic thing. I was going to say, too, who would ever thought that there would be a black market for avocados? It blows my mind. Also, I wanted to mention Venezuela. I'm not very educated with the complete situation down there, but I know they're having some problems right now with their food, And I don't think it's related grand solar minimum. I think it's because their government had so many sanctions that it almost makes it impossible for the Venezuela government to do business with the rest of the world for humanitarian. And obviously right now we're seeing it. But this could this could be something that could be a realistic scene in countries that experience food shortages that are caused by crop loss and things of that nature. And also I wanted to bring up too, everything that I looked up today, Christian, rice, oilseed, the only thing that was up was oilseed production. Everything else, like wheat, corn, rice, everything is being projected at a loss this year. And that was back in June. So we're coming up harvest season. I'm going to be curious to see what those new numbers are going to look like. But I'm not excited about this. This is the part about being a part of the grand solar minimum that I'm not excited about talking about, because, it's a tough situation to think about. It's a tough situation to imagine where something did happen to our power grids here in the United States or the whole world because of an EMP event or whatnot, or just total crop failure everywhere eventually, because we're only in the very beginning stages of the grand solar minimum. Our climate will continue to get even crazier as we move along. But it's important that we make this conversation happen, guys. As uncomfortable as it is, it's important that this conversation happens, because I'd rather you hear about this and be ready or aware instead of being caught with your pants down when things really start going south and it gets out of control. One other thing I wanted to mention before we jump off here tonight, Christian, how do you feel about any kind of currency that has to deal with digital?
Right, before we get to crypto, I just want to catch up on a couple of things you just mentioned, right? Because usually you made some great points there, and I think one of them is that this is a really tough realization, right? So you mentioned that you were getting mad at the elites for certain things, and I could definitely be mad at someone who came in and messed up my aquaponics, but it just doesn't help us to spend time on, especially on those elites. It does not help us to spend time. That's exactly what they want, is for us to get all pissed off, right? So I think we need to really emphasize the need to turn that cheek around and just channel that anger into productive channels. It's particularly difficult when, and I did a segment in Ice Age Farmer podcast, episode 7, on this, on sort of the grief that is associated with the realization that we're entering a grand solar minimum, and how that necessarily changes our reasonable expectations of the way that lives are going to go from here on out, right? And so there's grief associated with the loss of the abundance that we've been experiencing lately. And certainly, if you think we're going to lose the physical security we experience on the streets of civilized, Western civilization, and I think there's a good chance if food's not there, then physical security goes away. These are things that I value, and I will grieve I am already grieving their loss.
Yeah.
And I think there's nothing to be ashamed of. That's a very reasonable reaction. And so I think it's healthy to call this out and let people know that this is something that you're going to be experiencing as you internalize this reality. And boy, if this first stage of grief isn't denial, and if the media and the people walking around not talking about global warming don't reinforce that denial and make it even harder for us to overcome this normalcy bias and sort of the routine and going through the steps of just getting through the day, I think it's difficult, and it's incumbent on us all to really put in the effort to break out of that denial, and it's part of the grief and the fact that it's reinforced by everyone around us. It takes a lot of strength to do that.
Yeah, and you're right. And instead of getting angry about things that we can't control, you're right. It's best to just channel the energy that we have and be productive. And that can go for a lot of things in life. So good thing that you pointed that out as well, because you're right. We don't have any time to be angry. We don't have time to to start hating or fighting or anything like that. We need to come together and try to work together as well as humanity. But I just hope that's something that we can achieve. I think that's in a perfect world. But no, the only reason why I brought up cryptocurrency, and I guess I'll start first. I don't like the idea of cryptocurrency because of the possibilities of a CME or a solar flare event that would wipe out the grid and everything's gone. All your assets, everything that you worked for, everything that you've invested for is gone. And it kind of confuses me and puzzles me a little bit when I see people that support the education of grand solar minimum, but also support, knowing what they know about the grand solar minimum, still supporting the idea of putting your assets digital and making it available that way instead of having your hands physically. I mean, am I off on this one? I mean, is it just me, or is it kind of not really smart?
Well, it's a big topic, and the first and most immediate reaction I have is that I think that's exactly true for your bank account balance. All those dollars are bits in your some hard drive in your bank somewhere. So I don't think, if anything, actually the peer-to-peer currencies that are distributed on the blockchain out and about, even if one half the world lost their hard drives and their computers overnight, that blockchain is still distributed on the other half, but which is arguably more secure than the dollars in your bank, which are equally digital. But no, I think the thing that I would emphasize here is just to diversity. We've already talked about being operating on a self-sufficient homestead it depends on you having diverse streams of production, food production. Nature depends on diversity, and so if we just model ourselves on natural processes, then we too are going to diversify our assets. And so I think having a bit over here in this blockchain and then a bit in your U.S. dollars, and then I of course agree with you, Jake. If you don't hold it, then I think 90% of ownership is physical, right? So if you don't have it in your pocket, then so I would definitely advise people have gold and silver, and then some paper dollars if you're into that paper stuff. But moreover, the most important asset that we can all possess at this time is our knowledge and our skills, because if we are all weather refugees, climate refugees, looking to join up with other folks who have different sets of skills, then it is our skill sets that make us valuable to those communities, not the precious metals in our pocket that may or may not be in our pocket.
Well, and Lee also thinks that this is going to be, if we do have an EMP event, he thinks it's going to fry everything. He thinks it's going to be so powerful that, our magnetosphere will continue to weaken. Right now, it's already pretty weak, and we're not even in a full year one of grand solar minimum. In fact, and I know a lot of experts say that it'll really officially, we'll start really seeing the effects in solar cycle, the beginning of solar cycle 25. But Lee thinks it's going to be a global thing, and you are echoing the answer that the person that is pushing this or supporting cryptocurrency, you kind of mirrored his answer, and I understand that. That makes that, now I can kind of gain a little of understanding on why you would put a little here, put a little there. Crypto is still here because the other side's going to be all right. So I kind of get that mentality now, and I'm glad I asked you, because it's easier for me to I guess sift through the information if I'm hearing people more than one agreeing on a certain topic, and you certainly mirrored his answer as well, and that makes total sense now. I guess I just needed to hear it from another trusted source.
The other thing I would offer is, we looked at how the cryptocracy was positioning itself with vertical farming and indoor growing to benefit from these sorts of things. And so here too, I would look to see what they're doing, and all the major institutions are all in on blockchain. Ripple especially is one that they have basically championed themselves, and that's why I don't like it. I don't trust it, but they are definitely moving. Their international clearing is all moving to Ripple. So it'll be much faster and blockchain based rather than on the United States owned financial transaction network. And if you listen to Joseph P. Farrell, he is, for one, he's an amazing, prolific researcher that's just awesome. But some of the work that he's done emphasizes the fact that everyone is trying to move away from the United States owned EFT, financial transactions right now, and onto a less centrally owned, less United States, sort of a more multipolar New World Order approach. And so when I look to see how they're handling this, they're definitely all in and moving towards cryptocurrency. And that's, as much as I don't like it and don't want to say that I trust it at all, and I don't claim to trust anything about it, that does seem to indicate that there's going to be some longevity there. But yeah, no, I mean, when we have Janet Napolitano, the former DHS secretary, saying that America is headed for a major, unprecedented natural disaster and EMP, and when former CIA chief James Woolsey is promising that we're headed for an EMP, what do they know that's not being talked about? Well, I think it's reasonable to say that something's going on there, and that's not just the pre-scripting from North Korea. Maybe even North Korea provides the justification for, in case this happens, then they can pull it into their geopolitical script instead of having to tip the cards and say, actually, the sun's going through some crazy things right now. So, I don't know. The most damning thing I saw on that front was that as the primer fields collapsed, that we'd be encountering the resulting EMP from the sun. So It's definitely not outside the realm of possibility.
No, and Lee and I actually covered part 1 of primer fields of Rolf. I can't pronounce his last name.
Which, yeah, it's great.
And we plan on covering the second episode as well. That's a strong, and like I said, we talked about it. Lee's talked to me about it, and with what he's told me, Lee has not steered me wrong yet. I have to kind of go with what he's saying. So that's the only reason why I'd be against cryptocurrency, is if it was a global event. But with that being said, being diverse is probably not a bad idea either as well, having a little bit everywhere, and that way you're covered, because who knows what's going to be a real currency or an asset 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, hopefully way down the road. But as I've spoke before, I hope for a soft landing, and as you said before to me, you hope I'm right, but I've had so many people that study this topic tell me that, Jake, I hope you're right. I hope this is a soft landing. But everybody, when they say that to me, they're saying that and they're shaking their head no at me, like, that's not what's going to happen. So, all right, well, listen, Christian, thank you very much for coming on. I hope that we could have you on again. It's really fun to talk to you and get your perspective on certain things of the Grand Solar Minimum. And again, I really appreciate you coming on our show tonight.
I couldn't agree more, and it's been my pleasure, Jake. Thanks very much.
Awesome, Christian. We'll be in touch. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in tonight. We'll talk soon.